Everyone thought this was just another viral photo, until they noticed what the dog was staring at. The image spread across the internet faster than anyone could explain it, shared by millions, debated in comment sections, dissected in late-night forums, and still, no one could agree on what made it so unsettling. At first glance, it looked ordinary, just a quiet suburban backyard somewhere in America, a small white house, a wooden fence about 6 feet tall, and a golden retriever sitting perfectly still in the center of the frame, its body facing forward but its eyes locked onto something. Just outside the edge of the picture, something the camera didn't fully capture. People zoomed in, adjusted brightness, circled shadows, pointed at reflections in the window, but the longer they looked, the more confused they became, because nothing obvious seemed out of place. And yet, there was this undeniable feeling that something wasn't right. The dog's posture was what caught attention first, stiff, alert, almost frozen, as if it had been standing guard for hours, its ears slightly raised. Its gaze unwavering, not playful, not distracted, but focused in a way that made people uncomfortable. Some users joked about it, calling it the creepiest good boy on the internet, while others insisted there had to be something hidden in the image, something subtle that only a few could see. And that's when theories started to spiral. Was it a trick of the light, a glitch in the photo, or something much simpler that everyone was somehow missing? The account that posted the image belonged to a young woman named Emily Carter, and she hadn't expected any of this. Not the attention, not the speculation, and definitely not the fear that seemed to ripple through strangers who had never even stepped foot in her backyard. When she first uploaded the picture, it was meant to be a simple snapshot of her dog, Max, taken late one evening after he refused to come inside. Something he had never done before, something that, at the time, she brushed off as a strange mood or maybe just curiosity. But looking at it now, through the eyes of millions of strangers, she began to question everything. Because Max wasn't just sitting there, he was watching something, something specific, something just beyond what the photo revealed. And the more the internet obsessed over that detail, the more Emily started to feel a quiet, creeping unease in her own home. The kind that doesn't come from what you see, but from what you can't quite explain. People kept asking the same question over and over again, typing it in all caps, repeating it in videos and threads, analyzing every pixel as if the answer was hiding in plain sight. What did the dog discover? And no matter how many times the image was shared, enhanced, or re-examined, one thing became clear. The real mystery wasn't the picture itself. It was the reason Max refused to look away. By the next morning, Emily had barely slept, not because of the comments or the notifications that kept lighting up her phone, but because Max had not moved from that exact same spot in the backyard. When she checked on him just after sunrise, coffee still warm in her hand, he was standing in the same position as the photo, his body angled toward the fence, his eyes fixed on that same invisible point beyond it, as if time had not passed at all. She called his name softly at first, then louder, trying to break whatever strange focus had taken hold of him. But Max did not respond the way he usually did. There was no wagging tail, no eager steps toward her voice, just a slight shift of his ears and then stillness again. It was the kind of behavior that did not make sense, not for a dog who had always been affectionate, responsive, and calm. She stepped closer, walking across the damp grass, the cool morning air brushing against her skin, and for a brief second, she felt a flicker of hesitation, the kind that comes without reason, the kind you ignore because it sounds irrational, yet it lingers just enough to make you slow down. When she reached him, she followed his gaze, trying to see what he saw, but all that stood there was the fence, weathered wood with a few uneven planks, casting long shadows in the early light. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming, nothing that explained why her dog had been standing there for hours. She crouched beside him, gently placing a hand on his back, expecting him to relax. But instead she felt the tension in his muscles, subtle but unmistakable, like he was ready to react at any moment, not with aggression, but with urgency, like he was waiting for something. She whispered his name again, softer this time, almost reassuring, but his eyes never left that spot, not even for a second. Inside the house, her phone buzzed again. Another wave of messages, strangers asking questions, offering theories. Some even warning her to be careful. telling her that dogs do not behave like that without a reason. She tried to brush it off, telling herself that the internet always overreacts, that people love turning ordinary moments into something mysterious. But standing there beside Max, feeling the quiet intensity of his focus, she could not ignore the growing discomfort in her chest. Later that morning, her neighbor Daniel leaned over the fence, his voice casual but curious as he asked about the picture everyone seemed to be talking about. And when she explained what had been happening, he glanced at Max for a moment, his expression unreadable, then said something that made her pause longer than she expected. He told her that sometimes dogs pick up on things people miss, not just sounds or smells, but patterns, changes, things that do not quite belong. Emily forced a small laugh, trying to keep the conversation light. But Daniel did not smile back. Instead, he watched Max a little longer, then added that if the dog would not stop staring, it might not be about what was in front of him. It might be about what used to be there or what should not be. The words lingered in her mind even after he stepped away, leaving her alone in the quiet backyard with a dog that refused to look away and a question she could no longer dismiss. Because for the first time, it did not feel like the internet was exaggerating. It felt like they were missing something right in front of them, something Max had already found. By late afternoon, the atmosphere inside the house had shifted in a way Emily could not fully explain. It was not loud or obvious, but something about the silence felt heavier, as if the space itself was waiting for something to happen. Max had still not returned to his usual routine. He refused food, ignored his favorite toy, and had not stepped more than a few feet away from the back door, always positioning himself so he could see through the glass toward that same section of the fence. Every so often, he would let out a low, uneasy sound, not a bark, not quite a growl, just enough to make Emily look up from whatever she was doing and feel that small, persistent knot in her stomach tighten again. She tried distracting him, opening a bag of treats, calling him in the cheerful tone he always responded to, even grabbing his leash as if they were about to go for a walk. But nothing worked. His attention snapped back to that same unseen point every single time, as if everything else in the world had become irrelevant. As the sun began to dip lower, casting long shadows across the backyard, Emily found herself staring at the photo again on her phone, zooming in further than she had before, examining every inch of the image, the fence, the ground, the reflection in the window behind Max. And that was when she noticed something she had not seen earlier, not clearly at least, a faint shape along the edge of the fence line. So subtle it could have been dismissed as a shadow or a trick of the light. But the more she looked at it, the less it felt accidental. It was positioned exactly where Max had been staring, aligned perfectly with his line of sight. And for a moment, Emily felt a chill run through her arms, not because the shape was frightening, but because it suggested that Max had been reacting to something very real. She stepped outside again, holding her phone in one hand, comparing the image to the actual scene in front of her, trying to match angles, positions, distances, but the shape was gone, or at least no longer visible, leaving only the same quiet fence and the same patch of ground. Max stood beside her now, closer than before, but still focused, his body slightly angled forward, as if urging her to look harder, to notice what he had noticed. She followed his gaze once more, narrowing her eyes, scanning slowly from left to right. And that was when she realized something else, something even more unsettling than the shadow itself. The wooden plank in the exact spot Max was watching looked slightly different from the others, not broken, not obviously damaged, but just enough out of alignment that once you saw it, you could not unsee it. It was as if it had been moved, or replaced, or disturbed in some small way that had gone completely unnoticed until now. Emily took a cautious step closer, her heart beginning to beat faster for reasons she could not fully justify, and Max immediately tensed beside her, letting out that same low sound again, this time more insistent, almost as if he was trying to stop her or warn her at the same time. She hesitated, caught between curiosity and unease, her mind racing through possibilities that did not quite form into clear thoughts. And for the first time since all of this began, she understood that whatever Max had discovered was not something random. It was something specific, something intentional, and whatever it was, it had been right there the entire time, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to finally notice it. Emily did not move any closer, Not yet. Because something about the way Max reacted made her pause in a way she could not ignore. It was not fear exactly, but a kind of urgency that did not belong to curiosity alone. She stepped back slightly, glancing down at him, and for the first time since all of this started, his eyes shifted toward her for just a second, as if checking whether she understood, before snapping right back to that same spot on the fence. It felt less like random behavior now, and more like a warning. But a warning about what? She could not say. Her mind began trying to rationalize everything, telling herself that maybe the plank had always looked like that. Maybe the shadow in the photo was just a trick of lighting. Maybe Max had picked up a scent from a stray animal or something buried underground, something harmless that only seemed strange because she was overthinking it. But the longer she stood there, the harder it became to believe those explanations, especially when she noticed how precise Max was, how he never once looked anywhere else, not even when a car passed by or when a neighbor's dog barked in the distance. It was as if the entire world had faded away for him except for that one exact point. She exhaled slowly and turned toward the house, deciding she needed a different approach, something that would either confirm her doubts or finally put them to rest. Inside, she grabbed a small flashlight from the kitchen drawer even though there was still some daylight left, then returned to the backyard with a more cautious pace, her eyes now scanning not just the fence but the ground beneath it, the edges, the corners, every detail she might have missed before. Max followed closely behind her this time, staying near her leg but still angled toward the same direction, his presence both comforting and unsettling at once. She crouched down a few feet away from the plank, not directly in front of it, and shined the light along the base, expecting to see something obvious, maybe disturbed dirt or a gap. But at first glance, everything looked normal, too normal. She shifted the angle of the light, moving it slowly from left to right. And that was when she noticed something subtle but impossible to ignore once seen. A thin line running vertically along the edge of the plank, cleaner than the others, almost like it had been recently adjusted or removed and placed back. Her breath caught slightly as she leaned in closer, not touching it yet, just observing, and Max immediately let out a sharper sound than before, not loud, but firm, enough to make her freeze mid-motion. She pulled her hand back instinctively, her heart now beating faster, because whatever this was, Max clearly did not want her getting too close. Or maybe he wanted her to notice without interfering. She could not tell which. At that moment, she heard a faint noise behind her, just the sound of a door closing somewhere nearby. And when she turned, she saw Daniel stepping out into his yard. His posture relaxed, his expression neutral, but his eyes briefly flickered toward the exact spot on the fence before meeting hers. It was quick, almost too quick to register, but it was enough to send a new kind of unease through her, one that had nothing to do with shadows or wooden planks and everything to do with the realization that maybe Max was not just reacting to something hidden in the fence. Maybe he was reacting to someone who already knew it was there. Emily did not respond right away, not to Daniel, not to Max, not even to her own thoughts, because everything seemed to shift in that brief moment. The way Daniel's eyes had flickered toward the fence before settling on her felt too precise to be accidental, too aligned with everything that had been happening to ignore. She forced a small nod in his direction, pretending nothing felt out of place, while her mind quietly began connecting details she had not questioned before, small things that now carried a different weight, like how often Daniel was outside at odd hours, or how he always seemed to notice things before anyone else mentioned them. Max moved slightly in front of her, not aggressively, but with a subtle positioning that made it clear he was placing himself between her and the fence, his body angled just enough to block her direct path toward that altered plank. Emily swallowed, her throat suddenly dry, as she tried to keep her voice steady, and asked Daniel if he had ever noticed anything unusual about the fence, keeping the question casual, almost dismissive, as if she did not expect a real answer. Daniel paused for a fraction of a second before responding, his tone calm, almost too calm, saying that old fences shift all the time, especially with weather changes, and that it was probably nothing worth worrying about. The explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, the kind of thing anyone would say, but something about the way he said it, the slight delay, the way his gaze did not linger on the plank this time, made Emily feel like the answer had been prepared rather than considered. Max let out another low sound, quieter now, but steady, as if confirming something she had not yet fully accepted. And without thinking, Emily took a small step back from the fence, creating just a little more distance between herself and that spot. The air felt different again, heavier. Not because of anything visible, but because the situation no longer felt random. It felt structured, like pieces of a puzzle that were beginning to align whether she wanted them to or not. Daniel eventually nodded and stepped back toward his house, the conversation ending as quickly as it had started, but the moment lingered long after he disappeared inside, leaving Emily alone in the yard with a growing sense that she was standing at the edge of something she did not yet understand. She turned back to the fence, this time not looking at it directly, but through the reflection on her phone screen, trying to observe without being obvious. And that was when she noticed something that sent a quiet shock through her. A faint, nearly invisible glint near the edge of the altered plank, so subtle it could have been dismissed entirely, but placed exactly where Max had been staring all along. Her fingers tightened slightly around the phone as she adjusted the angle, trying to catch it again, and for a split second, it reflected back just enough light to confirm it was real, not a shadow, not a trick, but a physical detail embedded in that exact spot. Max immediately shifted closer to her, pressing lightly against her leg, his focus unbroken, and this time his presence did not just feel like concern, it felt intentional, like he had been guiding her to see it in her own way. Emily took a slow breath, her heart now beating with a clarity that replaced confusion, because whatever was hidden there was not accidental. It had been placed, concealed, and overlooked by everyone except one silent observer who had refused to look away. And for the first time, she understood that the real danger might not be the object itself, but the fact that someone nearby already knew it existed and did not want it to be found. Emily did not speak, did not move, and for several long seconds, she did not even breathe properly, because everything she had been trying to dismiss suddenly aligned into something undeniable. That faint glint, the shifted plank, Max's unwavering focus, and Daniel's reaction. None of it felt random anymore. It felt connected, and more importantly, it felt intentional. She slowly lowered her phone, careful not to make any sudden movements, and glanced toward Daniel's house, the windows reflecting the fading daylight in a way that revealed nothing about what might be happening inside. But the stillness of it all only made the situation feel more controlled, as if whatever was hidden had been meant to stay hidden. Max pressed closer against her leg again, his body tense but steady. And this time she understood the difference in his behavior. He was not reacting out of fear, he was reacting out of awareness. And that awareness had been there long before she noticed anything at all. Her mind began replaying every small detail from the past few days, every moment that seemed insignificant before, like how Max had started staying near the back door, how he refused to settle at night, how he would quietly reposition himself to keep that exact line of sight. And it became clear that the photo was not the beginning of this. It was just the first time anyone else had seen it. Emily took a cautious step backward, creating more space between herself and the fence, and Max immediately mirrored her movement, staying close, but still watching, always watching. She knew she needed to confirm what she had seen, but not by getting closer, not directly, not in a way that would reveal what she was starting to suspect. Instead, she walked slowly toward the side of the yard, angling herself so she could view the fence from a different perspective, using distance rather than proximity. And as she adjusted her position, she raised her phone again, zooming carefully toward that exact spot. For a moment, there was nothing, just the same worn wood and fading light. But then, just like before, the glint appeared again, clearer this time, catching the light at a precise angle, revealing something small and metallic embedded within the narrow gap between the planks. Her stomach tightened as she held the frame steady, focusing on that detail, and the longer she looked, the more defined it became. Not large, not obvious, but deliberate, something that did not belong to a simple backyard fence. Her thoughts raced, not toward fear, but toward understanding, because whatever it was, it had been placed carefully, hidden just enough to avoid casual notice, but not completely concealed from something as perceptive as Max. She lowered the phone again, her hands steady now, her mind clearer than it had been all day, because the uncertainty was gone, replaced by a quiet, focused realization that changed everything. This was not about a strange dog or a viral image. This was about something that had been put there on purpose, something that had gone unnoticed by everyone except the one presence that never stopped paying attention. Max let out a soft, controlled sound, almost like confirmation, and Emily gently rested her hand against his side, her voice barely above a whisper as she said his name, not to calm him, but to acknowledge what he had been trying to show her all along. She did not need to touch the fence to know anymore. She did not need to get closer, because the truth had already revealed itself in the smallest possible way, through a reflection, through a detail most people would ignore, and through the one silent warning she had almost dismissed. And as she stood there, her gaze shifting once more toward Daniel's house, she realized that the real question was no longer what Max had discovered, but why someone had gone to the effort of hiding it where only something like him would notice it in the first place. Emily did not need more proof, not in the way she thought she did before, because something inside her had already shifted from confusion to clarity, and that clarity came with a weight she could not ignore. She turned away from the fence slowly, her movements controlled, careful, as if acting too quickly might reveal something she was not ready to confront yet, and Max followed her without hesitation, staying close, his attention still anchored behind them even as they stepped back toward the house. Once inside, she closed the door gently, not out of fear, but out of instinct, like creating a boundary between herself and something she had only just begun to understand. The quiet inside felt different now, not comforting, but focused, like every sound and movement carried more meaning than before. She walked to the kitchen table and set her phone down, then immediately picked it up again, opening the photo once more, zooming in on that same spot. And this time she did not look at it as a random detail. She looked at it as evidence. The small metallic glint was faint, but consistent, and when she adjusted the brightness and contrast, it became slightly clearer, not enough to fully define, but enough to confirm its presence. Max settled beside her chair, not lying down completely, but resting in a way that suggested he was still alert, still listening, still aware. Emily exhaled slowly and leaned back, her thoughts moving faster now, connecting pieces that no longer felt separate, because if something had been placed inside that fence, something small and deliberately hidden, then someone had to have put it there, and the timing of everything made it impossible to ignore. She thought about when Max's behavior had first changed, not days ago, but slightly earlier, subtle signs she had dismissed, and then she thought about Daniel, about how he had been outside more often recently, how he had noticed the photo so quickly, how his explanation had come too easily. She shook her head slightly, trying to keep her reasoning grounded, reminding herself that assumptions could be dangerous, but the pattern was there whether she wanted to accept it or not. Her phone buzzed again. Another message, another person asking what the dog had been looking at, and for a moment, she stared at the screen without responding, because the answer was no longer something she could simply share online. It was something she needed to understand first. She stood up and walked to the back window, keeping the lights inside low, just enough to see without being clearly visible from outside, and she looked toward the fence again, not directly at the plank, but at the space around it, the shadows, the angles, the distance between her house and Daniel's. Everything looked the same as it always had, quiet, ordinary, almost too ordinary. Max moved beside her again, his presence steady, his focus unchanged, and she placed her hand gently on his head, this time not to calm him, but to thank him in a way words could not fully express. She realized then that whatever this was, whatever had been hidden in that fence, Max had been trying to show her long before anyone else noticed anything at all, and she had almost missed it. The thought lingered heavily, not as fear, but as a quiet realization of how close she had come to ignoring something important. Her eyes shifted once more toward Daniel's house, the windows still reflecting nothing but the fading light, and for a brief moment, she wondered how long it had been there, how long it had gone unnoticed, and more importantly, whether the person who placed it there knew that someone had finally seen it. Emily took a slow breath, her mind settling into a new kind of focus, because the situation was no longer about a strange image or an unusual behavior. It was about a hidden detail that had been overlooked until now, and the understanding that came with it changed everything. Because once something hidden is seen, It cannot return to being invisible again. Emily waited until the sky had darkened just enough for the backyard to fall into shadow, not completely dark, but dim enough that reflections became harder to notice from the outside. And that was when she made her decision. She did not rush. She did not act out of panic, because whatever had been hidden there had remained unnoticed for some time, and she needed to understand it carefully, not impulsively. Max stayed close as she moved through the house, his presence quieter now, but no less alert, his attention still tied to that same direction as if nothing else existed beyond it. She grabbed her phone again and adjusted the camera settings, lowering the brightness and focusing on capturing detail rather than light, then slowly stepped back toward the rear door, pausing just before opening it, listening, not for anything specific, but for any shift in the quiet that might signal movement nearby. Everything remained still. When she finally stepped outside, the air felt cooler, the kind of calm that usually brought comfort, but tonight it carried a different weight, one shaped by awareness rather than fear. She moved along the edge of the yard instead of walking straight toward the fence, keeping her distance while adjusting her angle, just like before, letting the light from inside the house fall behind her so that she remained partially in shadow. Max followed, careful, measured, never breaking his focus, and when she stopped, he stopped, his gaze already locked onto that exact point again. Emily raised her phone slowly, zooming in with deliberate precision, and for a moment, there was nothing, just dark shapes and faint outlines. But then the small reflection appeared. Again, clearer now against the dim background, catching a sliver of light from somewhere beyond her line of sight. She held the frame steady, her breathing controlled, and began recording, not knowing exactly what she would find, only that she needed to capture it without disturbing anything. The longer she watched through the screen, the more defined the object became, not large, not obvious, but unmistakably placed. Its position too exact, too intentional to belong there naturally. She shifted slightly, adjusting her angle again, and as she did, something changed, not in the object itself, but in the space around it, a subtle movement, so faint she almost missed it, like a shadow shifting where no shadow should be. Her grip tightened instinctively, her focus sharpening, and for a brief second, she saw it. Not clearly, not fully, but enough to understand that the object was not just sitting there alone. It was connected to something behind the fence, something positioned just out of view. Max let out a low, controlled sound, not loud enough to draw attention, but strong enough to make her freeze in place. And in that moment, everything clicked into a single, undeniable realization. This was not random, it was not accidental, and it was not something that had been forgotten. It was something that had been placed, maintained, and concealed with purpose. Emily slowly lowered the phone, her mind no longer searching for explanations, but processing what she had already seen. Because the question had changed again, it was no longer about what the object was, but about who had access to that space behind the fence and why it had been hidden so carefully. Her eyes moved instinctively toward Daniel's property, the outline of his house barely visible in the dim light. And for a moment, everything felt suspended, as if the quiet itself was holding its breath. Max shifted closer to her side, his body steady, his attention unwavering. And this time she did not hesitate. She understood that whatever had been discovered was not meant to be found. And the only reason it had been was because one silent observer refused to look away, guiding her step by step until the truth could no longer remain hidden. Emily did not wait until morning, because she already knew that waiting would not change anything. The truth had surfaced, and ignoring it would only make it heavier. Instead, she stepped back inside, closed the door quietly, and looked down at Max, her expression softening in a way it had not all day, not from relief, but from understanding. She crouched beside him and placed both hands gently around his face, meeting his eyes for the first time without doubt. And in that moment, the tension that had been building between confusion and realization finally settled into something clear, something grounded. "You were trying to tell me," she whispered, her voice steady but filled with quiet emotion, and Max responded not with excitement, but with calm, as if the urgency had passed now that she understood. Emily stood up and moved with purpose, not panic, gathering what she needed, her phone, her keys, and a sense of certainty that replaced the unease from before. She knew she could not handle this alone, not because she was afraid, but because whatever had been hidden did not belong to her to uncover in isolation. She stepped outside once more, Max close at her side, and this time she did not approach the fence. She did not investigate further. She simply looked at it from a distance, acknowledging what was there without disturbing it. The backyard felt different now, no longer mysterious, but resolved, like a question that had finally been answered, even if not every detail had been revealed. Her eyes moved once more toward Daniel's house, the windows still dark, the structure unchanged, but her perspective had shifted entirely, because she was no longer guessing. She was aware. She turned away without hesitation and walked toward the front of her house, Max following with a calm that mirrored her own, his earlier tension gone, replaced by a quiet steadiness that felt almost protective. As she reached the sidewalk, she paused for a brief moment, glancing back not at the fence, but at her home, the place that had felt ordinary just hours before, now holding a hidden detail she would never have noticed on her own. She exhaled slowly, not in fear, but in acceptance, because some truths arrive quietly, without noise or spectacle, and yet they change everything. Max sat beside her for a second, looking up at her with the same calm focus he had shown all along, and Emily smiled faintly, a small but genuine expression that carried more meaning than words could hold. She realized then that the most important part of everything that had happened was not the object, not the hidden detail, and not even the person who may have placed it there, but the fact that she had almost ignored the one presence that never stopped